Welcome to the Lair, a place where interesting people you may know tell you things you didn't. So grab a chair and your favorite vice and get comfortable. There are no rules in the Lair, but there is Laura Babcock. You know her from TV, and she is not into media monogamy. Let's find out who else is in the Lair.
Welcome to the Lair. We're here with Ryan McGreal. Ryan, it's so great to have you on the show. We appreciate you being here. Mm-hmm. We're here with Gabriella, of course, yep. And we've got some other people who are here in the Lair, our peanut gallery. Ryan, as you know, we invite people into the Lair that we think do interesting things or are interesting people. It's about more than any one particular thing that they've got going on. It's just about who they are. And something I've always been interested about you is that you care so much about your community that you created your own voice, a voice ever since I've been in the media in this town. I've been aware of the work that you do, and I'd love to know, how did you know that you had the ability to gain your own audience?
I don't think I ever really knew. I think we just thought, you know, there wasn't me. It was a group of people, and I was one of the main my name's attached to the website because I was the nerdiest of the bunch, so I was actually able to do the programming.
That's good. Then you knew enough to put your own name up there.
Right. I guess it goes back probably in about 2000 or 2003. I was really transported by the cycling championships when they came to Hamilton.
Right, I remember.
You know, it was kind of an epiphany for me. So I was walking around. We lived. We had just bought a house a couple of years before, and we were about 2 blocks away from the Queen Street leg of the trip. And so we'd walk over every day, and we'd dodge across the street when there weren't any bikes coming by. And then once you were inside what I jokingly referred to as the lockdown zone, everything changed. I mean, there were children running around playing on the street. Every time you turned around, you'd bump into people you knew. There was one guy who brought a TV out and set it up on his front lawn, so when the cyclists weren't going by, you could watch, you know, that fantastic helicopter footage that CH was putting on. And you know, somebody brought a case of beer out. I mean, I suddenly felt like I lived in this wonderful, wonderful community of amazing people, and I just thought, why the hell don't we do this all the time? Why don't we have a livable community? And I didn't know anything about urbanism. I didn't know anything about any of that stuff. Like I was coming at it from a totally different kind of political background. And so I spent the next year or two doing a lot of catch-up reading. And of course, you start with Jane Jacobs, right? And you kind of work your way forward through James Howard Kunstler and, you know, and all these iconic urbanist writers and thinkers. And so I started to develop a kind of a vocabulary for what was wrong with the city. And I wrote a couple of op-eds that were published in The Spectator, and each time I did, a few people would contact me and say, wow, I read your piece, and, you know, I've been saying the same thing, and we should get together. And slowly, over a period of about a year and a half, a group of maybe half a dozen people came together, and we started having meetings and trying to figure out what we wanted to do. A few of them were doing an occasional radio program on the Roy Green Show, where they would go on, and he would give them an hour to sort of run as they saw fit. So they'd bring in a theme or a topic of the day, and they would discuss it and get calls from listeners and various things like that. And it wasn't a great fit. Roy sort of he had a very kind of conservative approach to things.
Yeah, I was going to say.
They had a name. Were they
They were the Green Berets.
The Green Berets.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
And
so you had the Green Berets on the Roy Green Show.
Exactly.
Yes,
yeah.
I remember.
It started out as Greens Berets, and then it kind of turned into the Green Berets.
Yeah.
And Larry Deanny actually thought the name was a little too militaristic.
Yeah, it does evoke those
it kind of does.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't a great fit, and that kind of started to break apart. And I said, you know, I mean, I'm a web programmer. Why don't we make a website? You know, it's cheap hosting. There's no capital costs. We can write the stuff, we can put it out there, and you know what? If it's good, people will find it, and if it's not good, they won't find it, right? So, it's a win either way.
Absolutely. And, it's like with this Laircast, it's just, you put it out there, if people enjoy it, they enjoy it. If they don't, there's no downside.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, it either resonates with people, and, you know, I don't have a marketing background. We never did any advertising or promotion. We never bought any space. I don't even think I probably sent it to my friends, and I might have been a little bit embarrassed to. So we just put it out there, and very, very slowly, very organically, very steadily, it started to build momentum, and, you know, people would send links to each other, and, you know, it kind of went on from there, and gradually, you know, I got to the point where our readership was just sort of ticking upwards, and then people would start sending me stuff, which I thought was great because, you know, it meant that we didn't have to write everything ourselves. And it gradually, it came to become, I don't exactly want to say it was self-sustaining, but it's at the point now where I feel like it's rolling along. and we're not pushing a boulder up a hill anymore. It's kind of acquired its own momentum.
It's a nice feeling.
It really is, yeah. Although it makes me nervous because I'm thinking, I could get really comfortable with this and not take it to the next level, whatever that may turn out to be.
What is the next level?
I don't know. I mean, I make it up as I go along. I have absolutely no idea.
So what has it achieved, do you think?
Well, I think it's fair to say that it's probably moved the goalposts of the public discussion in Hamilton. I mean, one of the reasons we started is that we felt as though the kind of public discourse in the city was so constricted, and it reflected a very, very narrow set of interests.
Whose interests do you think they reflected?
Well, I think it reflected the interests of the people who were doing well with the way Hamilton was running.
Right.
And of course, I mean, that's almost a truism. I mean, it's almost trite to say, but in the mainstream media, we just felt as though these kinds of ideas weren't being introduced, these conversations weren't happening.
Right.
And so it started out as our attempt to try to introduce these ideas and get people talking about them. And at some point along the line, they started to, take on a bit of a wider interest. You had politicians talking about them. I mean, we were talking about light rail transit however many years ago, and I remember having a meeting with Scott, the Public Works General
he was
Manager
in charge
before.
of yes, that's right.
Yeah, I can't remember his last name now, but I remember having a meeting with him, and he said, "Oh yeah, light rail, yeah, it's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, 10, 20 years down the road, definitely something we want to start thinking about looking at. But we've got this, transportation plan." And I said, "But the province is telling us they want to build us a light rail line."
So how are you feeling about the fact that we may have missed the train, pardon the pun?
Well, it's frustrating, obviously.
We actually helped produce a promotional video for light rail. It's a great idea, certainly I've been a proponent of it. It makes perfect sense. It seemed as though the tie-in with Pan Am was the ideal time to have that kind of transportation, but are we even going to get it?
Well, I mean, I think the big problem with that is that the province came out with this really, really impressive 25-year, $50 billion plan. And when it came time to funding this plan out beyond the 18.5 billion that they kicked in the beginning, any
The
long-term
sustainability of it. Was
and any long-term kind of capital funding system is going to require some politically unpalatable ideas, right? I mean, you're talking about highway tolls, you're talking about a gas tax, you're talking about things that just don't play well, and so the province backpedaled from any talk about, okay, well, how are we going to pay for the next 18 and the next 18?
Yeah.
And so now it's sort of this race to see who can get their hands on the little pot that's there. And of course, Metrolinx was created as an arm's length group, right? We're going to fill it up with experts. We're going to get
But they're political appointees. On
well,
there,
I mean, but it started out as as sort of the mayors of all of the
municipalities that
right
were
in the
involved,
GTA,
yeah.
and what ended up happening was that the province got a sense that the mayors were making decisions based on fear and not based on best practice.
Sure.
So they said, okay, well, we'll replace the politicians with a bunch of policy experts, and instead they replaced them with a grab bag of Liberal appointees. I mean, you look at them and it's people who have almost no. I mean, Richard Coruscant, who's Hamilton's representative, is maybe the only person who has a really solid transportation background. It's real estate agents and there's nothing wrong with being a real estate agent.
But
wouldn't Richard's priorities be in contravention with some of your others? I mean, how do you feel about somebody who's a proponent of the airport development?
Well, I don't have to agree with him about everything to agree with him about light rail. I mean, he has an idea of what a comprehensive multimodal transportation vision looks like. I have an idea. There's some overlap there. I'd like to focus on the overlap wherever possible. I mean,
Do you think that that's an overwhelming approach? I don't know if you label yourself as an activist. I'm certainly not going to give you a label that you don't own.
Engaged citizen.
Engaged
How's
citizen. Okay, all good.
You seem like you've said that before.
As an engaged citizen, the fact that you look for the areas of overlap might be a very different approach than others have. I mean, when you first started Raise the Hammer, did people think that it was going to be an attack vehicle, something that was going to sort of challenge the status quo? Or from the very beginning, did you position it as something that was looking for the overlap?
Well, Hamilton is a city where there are these really, really deep fault lines. There's really, really deep ideological conflicts, partisan conflicts, socioeconomic conflicts, and there's plenty of fighting to go around. And if I can sit across the table from somebody who is, coming from a business background, And if we can come to an agreement on, an important initiative that's going to be good for business, good for the community.
Right.
Why would I not want to work with people? I mean, it's if you're always fighting against everyone.
Kind of takes everybody to get it done.
Well, sure, right? Yeah, and I mean, every place that has successfully implemented things like light rail have done it by getting the business community on board. By getting the realtors and by getting the home builders and the developers, because if you can convince them of the kind of money that they can make investing in those nodes around the light rail stations, I mean, it's huge.
Well,
And it's
I was. Sorry, no, go ahead.
I was gonna say, whoever thinks that we don't need light rail needs to just try and take a bus to Mac
Yeah.
during the school year.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Dang it, sister.
Oh yeah, I mean, we
bus
have
to
enough
Mac.
ridership right now, based on ridership alone, to justify light rail. But again, if you try to pitch it as this is going to improve bus service or this is going to clean the air, nobody cares about that stuff.
So what you're
I mean,
saying
They
is
want to
that's-
get from point A. People want to get from point A to point B.
But from
easier
the
and
point of view
faster.
of investors, there has to be a bottom line value proposition.
Yeah,
that says it's
exactly.
good for you, whatever your interests are.
That's right. And so the Home Builders Association, actually, you know what, I don't know if they officially support it. The last time I looked, they were expressing interest in it. But the Realtors Association supports it, the Chamber of Commerce supports it, the Jobs Prosperity Collaborative supports it. All kinds of the Downtown BIA, the Lock Street BIA, the International Village BIA, all of these business interest groups recognize that there's a huge opportunity to leverage, a valuable fixed capital investment to.
So just to move it away from light rail for a
Sure.
minute, first of all, how do you make a living?
I work as a programmer.
Okay, so this is Raise the Hammer, and all of this community civil engagement is something that you do in addition to your day job.
Yeah, it's sort of an increasingly inaccurately named hobby.
I was going to say.
You know what? I don't commute. I mean, my commute is a 30-minute walk, right?
Sure.
And we don't have cable, so I don't watch TV. So that's about 3 hours a day that I've freed up. And,
Yeah.
if I can,
It's true. It's true.
Makes a good point. So you have the time on your hands, but still, what I'm getting at is it's quite a commitment to stay versed on all of this, to have relationships with all the players. The fact that you take an approach that says, and I'm going to quote you on this because I love the expression, looking for the overlap that people have in issues as opposed to things that divide them. You reference the fact that Hamilton has deep fault lines, and we have people who listen to this program who aren't from Hamilton, but they're not necessarily things that are unique to Hamilton. Communities tend to divide, as you said, along socioeconomic lines, along political lines. Do you find that, what do you think is the reason for Hamilton to be, I've called it a tale of two cities, maybe it's a tale of several cities, but it really does seem to be a city that, there seems to be two sides clamoring on any given issue. It delayed a road project for 50 years. Some people might say it prevented a terrible road for 50 years. But the point is...
it's amalgamation.
Yeah,
it's all amalgamations. No.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Tell
There's-
Bob that.
Whether it's people with the haves versus the people who don't have enough, as much as they should, there's a real poverty issue. But even along political divides, there's a powerful party division within the city. What do you think is the root of that? Because as you're trying to look for the overlap, you must have spent some time assessing what's caused the division.
Well, I jokingly said amalgamation, but I think part of the problem is that Hamilton, the political entity we have today, is it was mashed together by a provincial party that wanted to create a large enough property tax area in order to download social services costs. So right off the bat.
Talking about the Harris government.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I've talked to several people who are involved, working in the Conservative Party at the provincial level, and they made that very clear that they knew that on average swapping education for social services was kind of revenue neutral, but they also knew that some places were going to get hit disproportionately. And Hamilton, for example, the old city of Hamilton handles the social services programs and expenditures that look after the entire region.
Right.
So
and
from
some
an
would argue they have a vested interest in maintaining those services here in Hamilton because it's its own self-generating industry. It creates decent jobs. So the idea that you hear sometimes of dispersing those social services, leveling the playing field between different communities, there are people who actively work against that because it's in their best interest to keep that as a social service hub in our core.
Well, I don't know the industry well enough. I've heard that argument that it's that it's the poverty industry, and I really, I know a number of people who work in social services in Hamilton, and that's certainly not the sense I get from them. I mean, there's an overwhelming need. There's a massive need, and the need is not anywhere close to being met right now. So if
But is it because other communities, and again, you've probably heard this argument, put people on buses? There's this famous tale.
Well, Mel
that goes around
Aspin
town.
did that, right?
Right.
He bought
said,
one of my
here,
tickets.
here's a ticket to Hamilton. Bring your needs to Hamilton.
Yeah, I mean, that was an ugly anecdote, but I don't know. I don't have the data, right? I don't know how systematic that is. I haven't seen actual numbers of
But what do you
of
think
flows of people.
what do you think it is that causes, to your language, those deep divides in the city?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think part of it is Hamilton is several cities all in the same place, and and again, like any city, different constituencies have different and sometimes competing interests. And I think Hamilton, for a long time, we were a city that didn't have enough of a diverse economy, and so we didn't have lots and lots of different interests. Kind of, I sort of think of it, and I hope you'll forgive the expression, but I think of it as like bacterial flora in your intestines, right? There's a whole, there's like 700 different kinds of bacteria all coexisting, and there's not really too many of any of them. And if, I don't know, your immune system, goes down, or you haven't got enough sleep, and maybe you're drinking too much coffee, your pH goes out of whack, and one of them becomes opportunistic and takes over the whole thing. That's when you get a really, really bad infection. And I get a sense that Hamilton is almost like a monoculture in its political economy. And I think when you have that, you get all kinds of unhealthy side effects and distortions. And I think there's a lot of that going on here.
So what are some of the solutions for the city going forward?
Well,
I mean, I've seen your list. Our research team here is pretty good. I've seen your recommendations for the city. But, you've listed a bunch of specific tactics, but getting back to the idea of the divide, because the tactics that I've seen, and you can by all means list them if you like, but they refer to specific actions. We need to try this, do this, do this. Does that get to the root of the bigger question, which is the divide, the fact that we're an amalgamation of a city, lots of different communities, nobody's really healed from that?
Well, I think part of the reason for the divide, and I find I kind of run into this again and again, but there's a lot of fear. People are afraid of each other. People are afraid of the other, and I think, and I mean, fear drives the comments and the letters to the editor on the spec. Fear drives.
Tell me about those comments.
Well, it's just downtown is just a warren of lowlifes and scum and this kind of stuff. I haven't been downtown in 10 years, but let me tell you what downtown needs. And if you switch the streets to two-way, there's no way in hell I'm going to come downtown, even though I don't come downtown. I mean, there's this kind of.
One way, I just went through downtown as a way to get to the other.
Right.
City.
It's this combination of I want to say ignorance in the sense of just refusing to make the effort to kind of find out, and I think that's driven by fear. I think when you operate by fear, your reptilian hindbrain is doing your thinking for you, and you're not going to make good decisions. And so to try and
you just did a blog on fear recently.
Yeah, I think fear can cause a lot of issues in your personal life, and like you said, in a community, if you don't understand, or if you're not willing to understand the other side. And I mean, really, there shouldn't be one side or the other side in one single city, right? Why does it have to be like that?
I was going to ask you, is it fair to say, does it go the other way, right? When I'm playing, well, let me ask you the question. When you hear about different voices out of the mainstream, they're usually urbanization advocates, they're usually downtown advocates. It's the old city saying, since amalgamation, we're not being given the resources, the support.
Well, it's not just the old city. I mean, a couple of months ago, I got an email and a phone call from the Ancaster Village Preservation Society, who were in an absolute state of anguish because the Ancaster Transportation Plan came in. And of course, like all of our policies, right, we have our vision. We would be the best place to engage citizens, and the best place to, provide diverse economic opportunities, and the best place to raise our child. And then the traffic engineering department gets their hands on it, and everything else gets thrown overboard. And so they have a 200-year-old downtown Ancaster. I mean, if it's not the only existing 18th century neighborhood, it's got to be pretty, in southern Ontario, it's got to be pretty close to it. And the city's attitude is we're going to have these 2-3 kilometer stretches with no crosswalks and no stoplights. We're going to have 2 lanes each way with a left turn lane, and we're going to get, we're going to push these kind of sidewalks out of the way, and we're going to get rid of these trees because, they make drivers nervous. And we're going to put a roundabout here. And so, I mean, what they're seeing is that I mean, this isn't downtown Hamilton. This is downtown Ancaster.
But I always thought of Raise the Hammer, and this just might be my own ignorance. I always thought of it as being promoting the old city's issues, saying, look at us, now you're part of us, look at us, help us. Urban intensification, promoting downtown, this, as you talked about, this vision of what downtown could be based on the experience of the cycling, world cycling. Does it engage the other municipalities that have been moved in?
I think what you're seeing is probably a side effect of what we're doing. You know, because, I mean, most of the people who are involved with Raise the Hammer probably live downtown. Probably a disproportionate number of people who read it live downtown, just because it's just not really of that much interest to somebody who, you know, wants to buy a house in Glenbrook, for example. So I mean, that's not, and I don't want to cast aspersions against people who want to live in suburbs. There's lots of really good reasons to live in the suburbs.
But aren't they saddled with the fate of downtown? You know, you
well,
can't be part
I would
of,
make an argument that if you have, I mean, suburbs are expensive. I mean, from an economic point of view, suburbs are basically an economic black hole. They don't really produce anything. They don't manage any waste. I mean, they cost a lot of money to operate. You know, the unit cost of providing infrastructure to a far-flung suburb is really high. The roads are expensive. The water is expensive.
They create an idyllic 1950s.
And there's not a lot of there's not a lot of economic activity, right? So suburbs they're not generating wealth. They're producing huge public costs and are you know, from a city point of view, the amount of development charges and property tax that are being collected building suburban houses isn't enough to pay for them. So every new suburban house we build, the city's financial situation gets worse, not better. And then at the provincial and federal level, the highways that we build to service suburbs are not funded out of money that's collected from drivers. And so there's a major subsidy going on. What I would argue is that if you had to pay the real price of living in a suburban community as opposed to living in, say, a more urban community, I think fewer people would choose that. And at the same time, you would have more resources in order to improve the quality of, you know, I mean, right.
How do you feel about the changes to area rating that council finally approved?
I actually proposed almost exactly what they ended up doing 2 years ago.
So you're pleased with the
I'm really impressed that they managed to come together on this, and that it was a bold move. I mean, it's fear, right? Politicians are terrified of these kinds of issues.
Well, they did it earlier in their 4-year mandate, so by the time it comes around, there'll be some other issue.
Or they did it really late in their previous 4-year mandate.
Well, I think they passed the buck, although it's mostly the same council.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that was a brave decision as well. After years of kicking the can down the road, they finally dealt with it. Let me shift gears just for a moment.
Sure.
Another issue that is not just Hamilton-based, but I think universal, is access to information. Transparency. There was recently something proposed out of the mayor's office that talked, again, taking it to a broader level than just our community, talked about who should get access to information, who was qualified media, who was, outside of the club kind of thing. And I found it a weird position to be in, having been a traditionally trained broadcast journalist. Then, I still have, on Tuesdays, I've got a broadcast boss, if you will. The rest of the time, I'm a blogger, I'm a free agent, I do my own thing. When I saw that they were trying to restrict access to, the quote was, people who have a boss. You don't have a boss, you and your friends probably Raise the Hammer, am I correct?
Well, my wife actually proposed
that if
someone wasn't happy with me, they'd be welcome to talk to her.
I had a similar conversation that I'd happily be a fake boss for all the bloggers out there.
She's very good at getting me to bill people, when I do freelance work.
But the suggestion that
I think
credibility comes with having some sort of hierarchical structure.
I think you need a lot more controls on who can have access to this kind of information, because if any old citizen can start getting their hands on this kind of stuff, they're going to ask a lot of really awkward questions, and it's going to cause lots of problems. It's going to be very hard to keep the machine rolling.
or as my good friend show host Larry Deanny said one time about open data. I didn't know anything about it. I'm not going to pretend I'm a huge advocate for open data, because I really hadn't thought about it, to be quite frank. But when I heard his argument being that if citizens get access to this, they'll get confused by all the big numbers, I found myself
that's a bit condescending.
Well, I found, and that was,
a bit.
But my reaction was one of, I don't like being condescended to, and I thought that sounded like a strange position to come at, something that seemed important once I heard.
But I'll say this in defense of Larry Deanny, and I've corresponded. We actually get along surprisingly well.
You don't know how many people say that to me.
It's
I really do like Larry.
He's a likable
he really
guy.
Is a good,
he's a nice guy. He's a really nice guy. But he actually, I mean, he made it very clear to me that he supports Light Rail.
Open data.
He supports open data, but he has some concerns, and I thought some of the issues that he raised were fair,
He didn't
and
feel
I
that
tried to
it
make.
had been articulated clearly.
Yeah,
for him
and
by
I actually
anyone.
wrote a follow-up piece that specifically tried to address some of the concerns that he'd raised. But for me, I mean, the background I come from politically is fairly progressive. I mean, I've got kind of a libertarian streak, but in terms of my training and my career, I'm a programmer,
Right.
and so in programming, there's a really big movement called the open source movement,
Yeah.
and essentially, I mean, my computer at home, I use a free open source operating system. All of the applications that run are open source. I've written software myself and released it under an open source license. What I find, and the thing is, it works. I mean, about 2/3 of the internet runs on open source software.
Right.
It's massive. I mean, my phone, runs on.
Didn't one of our local billionaires make his money off of an open source proposition?
One of them did, yeah. And,
Yeah.
and now it's really interesting actually that you say this, because the Red Hat business model is that you commoditize the complement.
Yeah.
And this is and so what you do is you give away a free operating system. You get this operating system into as many hands as possible. What you want, and I think he famously made a statement once that he wanted to take the $5 billion operating system market and turn it into a $5 million market. But then once you get the operating system out into enough hands, now you can make money selling selling support, selling, these kinds of other
Right.
things, right? Almost like, giving away really cheap tie-cat tickets and then making all your money selling concessions and
Concessions.
parking.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
it's the same business model, really.
Yeah.
It's very similar. So I wasn't surprised to see him take that tack with it. But the fact is, there's a lot of money to be made in open source. But at the same time, there's an enormous amount of productivity to be made in open source. Because if one person fixes a problem and shares that solution, thousands or tens of thousands of people
Right.
realize the efficiency gain of that solution every day. And when you multiply that by thousands of people building things and releasing them, it's almost intoxicating.
Right.
Well, you know what? Change always brings a little bit of fear and also some good considerations to make a better solution for everybody. It's been so fascinating to finally talk to you, Ryan. I've watched
Likewise.
your work for a long time and I really
Likewise.
enjoyed it. We'll have to have you back at another point in the Lair because there's so much more we can talk about.
For sure.
Thank you for the
Thank
perspective you
you.
bring to our city.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks, guys.
Chats in the Lair is a Power Group production. Visit us at powergroup.ca or laircast.com, or check us out on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.